Welcome to the Art Channel. In this film, we're visiting an exhibition of work by Lygia Pape, a Brazilian artist who lived between 1927 and 2004. At Hauser and Wirth in central London, there are a number of works from her long artistic career.
We're here in front of Tateia 1C, this wonderful installation, first made in 2001, and it is Parque exploring the relationship between objects and space.
What you have are very taut, strung silver wires that run from the ceiling to the floor, and so they express the whole space, the dimensions and volume of the room. And she's using this very theatrical lighting mounted on the ceiling to articulate, really, the string where it meets the light. But of course it moves in and out of clarity, doesn't it? So that you get this ambivalence about the space where the strings sometimes disappear into darkness.
Yeah, it's a wonderful piece. It needs the viewer, and it's part of her later work where she wants you to be a part of the experience. So this is not sort of dry abstraction. It needs you to move around, and as you say, every time you move it alters. And it's wonderfully kind of ethereal. It's a really beautiful piece to be with.
Aesthetically, it's really just pleasing, and it instills a sense of sort of awe and respect for the materials and the properties of light. Because effectively the sculpture, the installation, is completed by light, which, as we know, is very intangible. And effectively, you have an experience that's very architectural and immersive and ambient.
I think it's the work of a mature artist who knows how to manipulate space, knows how to manipulate the viewer, as you say. Silver thread, light, these beautiful kind of columns. And she very much leaves you to experience it, and I think it really works because it's so confident, it's so minimal.
You were mentioning earlier about how we can see its making, the nails. It doesn't have that kind of polished finish. You can imagine her stringing them out in her studio and really kind of experimenting with that light contact on the silver string.
Yeah, I really like that. I like the fact that you can see the working out. I like the truth to materials and the truth to the method. And I think perhaps if this was being made now, it would be made in a very different way. There would be some hiding of the making, but that I'm really enjoying.
And finally, we should mention that there's a nice connection between this late installation and her earlier woodblock prints, whereby she's thinking about weaving the line together, originally in the 1950s, in a woodblock print on paper. But here she sort of extends it outwards into 3 dimensions and is playing with this kind of interaction of pure line.
We're standing in front of Tateia number 7, made in 1991, and it is really a piece, I think, about the joy of materials. And it's a take on formal abstraction, but as in the other work, she takes it off in a more lyrical direction.
Well, I'm intrigued by this piece because we have a doubling, an exact replica of a pyramid that is articulated with blue pigment that then encounters the direction of a blue light. Does the addition of the blue light act as a kind of cancellation of the blue pigment, or does it amplify it? And it's kind of a conundrum. I mean, within the dark space, you get this sort of blue glow that spreads out beyond the apex of the pyramid. But there are a number of questions here that are not sort of fully resolved, are they?
I think it is an experimental piece, and I think she would be happy to talk, for us to talk about it in that way. I think she was pushing those boundaries, and I think this is less resolved than some of the other, perhaps more formal pieces, and maybe the woodblock prints. But I do think, as you say, the doubling, the almost exact object twice, is really quite fascinating.
Well, she's very drawn to experimentation, to that kind of tactile sort of honesty of materials, as you mentioned earlier. But you can see round the edge of the pigment that, of course, it cannot, by definition, be an exact replica. It's a sort of doubling in the spirit of the original, whichever one you take as the starting point.
And I think that is part of our later practice, saying that, you know, perhaps European abstraction, that very hard-edged, perhaps male way of making work, can't last. You know, she's always pushing the boundaries, making it more accessible, making it more human in a way.
Well, she, along with her colleagues and friends, Elio Sika and Lygia Pape, really want to democratise art, to open it up to the senses beyond just eyesight, to look outwards to the street, to places of sort of social interaction within the Brazil of the 60s and 70s.
And I think you're right, bringing people to the art and taking the art to the people and making art much more accessible was really a part of their practice.
And finally, she sort of alludes to this importance of breaking down that distance between, as it were, the intellect and the body. We're looking at one of Lygia Pape's early woodblock prints, whereby she uses the grain of the wood, which we can see here in terms of its the direction of the grain, and it's printed on Japanese paper. It's quite coarse, rough paper. And at this point, Lygia Pape is thinking about abstraction from Europe. These Brazilian artists are looking to Europe for ideas, for inspiration, but beginning to turn away for a more kind of indigenous Brazilian art making that's more democratic and open and questioning and focused on materiality. And she talks about how she's not interested in hierarchy, so she always avoids figuration, that is a figure or prominent subject against a backdrop. So there's this kind of equality all over the page.
They're very beautiful, actually, and they have, they sort of punch above their weight. They're very small pieces of work, but they're very, very powerful. And you're right, she talks a lot about the printmaking process and the process being quite important. And I'm interested to hear that she talks about making a print flat on the table, making a painting or a sculpture on the wall. So you have a different relationship with the materials that you're using. And I think the relationship with the materials is very, very important for her. And, you know, you've got this very dense wood pattern on this very, very almost transparent Japanese paper. And again, looking to European traditions, but liberating them really and moving away from them.
You've got this sort of tactile quality, don't you, to this print, with this interest in the irregular line, the wood grain. She's playing with space too, whereby you have this striped element appearing to almost like sort of swivel or rotate back into a deeper space. And so illusion is clearly kind of summoned up in the work, but while at the same time she's asserting that kind of very print-like quality of the image.
So she's playing with the idea of geometric abstraction and that formality and pushing and pulling it. And, you know, there is a little bit of surrealism in there. There's a little bit of cubism in there. There's a trick for the eye. You try to read depth and then she stops you again. So it's a very accomplished piece of work, I think. I think it's a really strong show, and I think Pape is an artist that we need to pay more attention to. It's great that this body of work's been brought together. She is able to articulate space with the minimum amount of intervention, and her woodblock prints are really quite monumental. So I think it's a very strong body of work. And when she says, you know, making art is a way of understanding the world, that makes total sense when you see these works.
Yes, her work is very simple and direct. There's a sort of authentic spirit to them. But she takes the geometric and leads it towards the sublime and the material and the tactile. And that's what's very kind of dynamic and interesting and relevant about her work, I think. So thank you for watching the Art Channel. Please do subscribe to the channel. If you've enjoyed this film, give us a thumbs up. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram.